My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. I'm Mick Fitzgerald. Well, today on LGBT Life we're delighted to have as our guest Ciaran Ó'hUltacháin, and Ciarán has come all the way in from UCD. Good afternoon, Ciarán. Welcome to, not only welcome to Dublin City FM and LGBT Life, but also welcome to East Wall.
Good afternoon, Mick. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Ciarán, it's a while since we've caught up, but I've seen you at many of the events that I've been to, whether it's been the March for Marriage Equality, whether it's been at Pride. Significant changes over the last 3 years, would you agree? Particularly in the LGBT area.
There have been very significant changes over the last 3 years, and in particular in the last year, which was a momentous year for LGBT Ireland on a whole range of different levels. I mean, the three things that stand out is that, as most people would say, was the passing of the marriage referendum, and also the introduction of gender recognition for adults, which was a phenomenal achievement in Ireland, and also changes to Section 37 of the Employment Equality Act, so to protect LGBT staff and religious run institutions. They would be three of the very, very big legislative changes in the country that also have profound social and cultural impacts as well.
It's because it's interesting, when you and I first met, and I suppose when we last met 3 years ago, all of these things, they were aspirational in the sense that we discussed how we'd like to see these happening and why it was all important. But I don't think realistically any of us believed it would all happen so quickly. Did you at the time, or are you an eternal optimist?
I would be an optimist, yes. However, no, I don't think most of the leaders and most of the people in positions of leadership in the LGBT community in Ireland would have foreseen the level of change that came about, especially in 2015. But of course, that was, if you take a longer historical perspective, there was a 30-plus year period where all this change was being built, and the foundation stones were being laid for this change. And you know, when people are reflecting back on the previous government, there were a lot of mistakes made in a whole range of social policy areas, and probably, you know, with regard to economics and economic policy and that kind of sphere in general. However, when people look back, probably they'll be a lot kinder in the record that the last government achieved and on a range of different areas in relation to LGBT rights in general. And
true. One of the you mentioned one aspect, and certainly 3 years ago when we were discussing some of these issues, and even because I did actually meet you on in Ball's Bridge on the 23rd of May. Do you remember that, in the hotel?
Of course, yes.
When we were all beside ourselves, knowing that the referendum was going to pass at that stage. Even at that point, none of us could have really hoped that the gender recognition legislation that came in, what was on the table then, was still fairly unacceptable to it, particularly to the transgender community. Do you have an explanation as to why suddenly within a couple of weeks we got some of the most progressive legislation in the world that didn't look as though it was happening?
I don't know the background story. I wouldn't have been privy to those negotiations between Joan Burton, the minister, and the senior people in government, and this was very much being led by TENI, by the Transgender Equality Network.
Yeah.
However, it's fair to say that the level of public support that was demonstrated for marriage equality and the sheer level of joy that erupted in Irish society, and the positive glow of the embracement of marriage equality by the Irish people, but also maybe the international reaction and the representations of Ireland and Irishness and what it meant that Ireland was at the foreground, was a world leader in advancing equality. I think it must have had a profound impact on both Fine Gael and Labour within government.
Yes, well, I mean, anybody who was down at Dublin Castle at the time, to actually see, knowing what's going on now in terms of government negotiations, I mean, they were all embracing each other. It was a remarkable, as I say, atmosphere to be part of. But something I noticed around that time, and I'm just wondering whether the politicians did get carried away with the moment, and if they did, great. But the other thing that happened, and hasn't really been canvassed all that much, between us passing the marriage equality referendum and the gender recognition legislation going through, there was one significant international event, and that was Caitlyn Jenner was on the cover of Vanity Fair. And I just, now in the past we might have expected some horrific sort of reaction, but the reaction was relatively positive, and I'm not going to ask you anything about Caitlyn Jenner. And I just wonder whether the politicians here basically said, this is the way the tide of history is flowing. Did you have any thoughts on that one?
It's, yes, when we look back in 2015, in Ireland, it will, go down in record that internationally, the issue of trans rights very much erupted to the surface and became a mainstream issue. And so it became, because it was being played out on one of the most popular reality TV shows in, across the world, and a show that was in no way macro political, usually in the issues that it covered. So there is very increasing acceptance in through the liberal media of transgender rights had mainstreamed. Transgender rights were mainstreaming in both a cultural sense, and that would have supported the arguments and the rationale for and the lobbying that was going on behind the scenes in Ireland by a range of different organisations.
On that point, we saw it in the marriage equality referendum, and to a certain degree I think we saw it, we've certainly since seen it in the area of transgender. How important do you think visibility actually is? Because nowadays you can't turn on a soap pretty much without at least having one transgender character. We had one in Coronation Street, we've now got one in EastEnders. We've had an entire series on was it HBO with Transparent. It seems as that the more there is visibility, the greater chance of acceptance. Is that a view you would subscribe to?
Yes, very much so. So my background originally is in sociology. I studied sociology and politics, and Tom Inglis, who's a professor in UCD in sociology, has written about this extensively. His most important book is Moral Monopoly, The Rise and Fall of the Catholic Church in Modern Ireland, and his key argument is that it was the introduction of the media in Ireland back in the 1960s, first our own media and then in the foreign media in the late 60s, early 70s, that was the death knell of the Catholic Church. So over a generation, people were being accustomed to watching soap operas. People were being accustomed to what's called really a discourse or values of liberal individualism. We lived in a society that was dominated by really values of conservative Catholicism. They were replaced by values of liberal individualism. So people were seeing people in soap operas having affairs. People were seeing people in soap operas. Originally it was just with regard to heterosexuals. People were having children outside marriage. People were cheating. People were sexual mores and sexual liberalism had a vehicle in Irish society, but it percolated in every aspect, in the media, in TV, in radio, and even in print media. And over time, if you look at Irish society over the past 10-15 years, the number of originally it was lesbian and gay characters, or people. So for example, now in the UK, the most successful, the fact that Graham Norton is the most successful TV presenter,
yes,
and the impact of that, or even the impact looking back at the first Big Brother at the very beginning, or was it the second one? Was it when I forget, it was
Will
Brian
Young.
Will Young and Brian, was it Brian or Brian Dowling, where there was
That was Big Brother,
yes.
yes.
Yes, so over the past 30 years there has been increasing visibility, there's been increasing relaxation of what's considered sexual norms in Irish society, and that has been, and very much so, maybe actually this is maybe one of the most interesting things about the marriage equality referendum. Like, there are parts of liberal Dublin, there are areas where we expected a big yes vote. Everybody was expecting a big yes vote in Dunleary, for example, or in Ranelagh. However, in the past, if you look at the results in the past, working class Dublin would have been more conservative than liberal Dublin 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There would have been maybe greater religious religiosity, and more people, there would have been a greater attendance at Mass. But over the past 15 years or so, it's really since the late 90s, since all the scandals, the sexual abuse scandals, and since the moral authority of the Catholic Church was totally wiped out with the level of sexual abuse scandals. And when all that was exposed, it appears that within working class Dublin now, the adherence to traditional Catholic teaching and attendance even at Mass has just completely dwindled. So now where I live in Rialto, or I live in Dublin 8, one of the most interesting things was, I remember going into the voting centre, and usually it was 5 p.m, and usually at that time, I think the turnout overall might be 30%, but at that point almost 40% of people. There's a huge turnout from Dolphins Barn flats. So people living in Dolphins Barn were going and voting yes. So working class people who were single parents were going and voting yes. People who were disadvantaged in Irish society, people who were severely disadvantaged, people maybe who had a lot of issues relating to kind of economic insecurity, they were all voting yes, and that's because of the profound changes, and part of that was related to, as you were saying, visibility in the media.
Yeah, now one of the things I was, not only was I proud of the outcome and that Ireland had acknowledged LGBT people, but I was particularly proud of the areas that I grew up in, because I grew up in the working class parts of the north side, and I think essentially listening to what you were saying there, it blew away a stereotype, because if we have a look at the votes out in places like Donamead and Kilbarrack and Ballymun, they were astonishing. And I interpreted that to say, well, this was like, it wasn't there were massive numbers of gay people out there, but it was it was a recognition of a collective oppression, and saying, well, there's a group that's being oppressed, and we can do something to relieve that. And I felt very proud of that at the end of it all. What would you say are the significant changes that you've seen, particularly around town? I mean, one of the aspects I would say I've noticed is more men holding hands. More men are confident about holding hands, something that you mightn't have seen 3 years ago. Have you noticed any particular changes yourself, Ciarán?
Yes, it appears to me and to a lot of my friends that anecdotally it appears that same-sex couples are just being freer in their expression, and that there's less fear. Like, one of the things about living in a working class neighbourhood that could be quite rough is that in the past there would have been a fear that there would a possibility that there may be violence against lesbian or gay people or LGBT people in general if there was any displays of affection, and it appears that people are much more comfortable around displays of affection. Now, this is our anecdotal, what we're thinking. So the National LGBT Federation, which I'm vice chair of, we're in the process of a national community consultation at the moment, Burning Issues, which has been ongoing since January, and so we're conducting a national survey, and we've also conducted focus groups across the country. And so one of the questions within Burning Issues is, do people feel safer? Do people feel more comfortable and safer in the streets as LGBT since the referendum? And it'll be very interesting to analyse that data and to see what people are saying, what the scientific evidence is, or so it's more than just anecdotal. It'll be interesting too.
We'll come to that in a second, Ciarán, but I just want to talk to you about the National LGBT Federation. What is it? What does it do? What's its focus?
Okay, so we're the oldest existing LGBT community organisation in the country. We were set up way back in 1979 when I wasn't around. I know the Irish gay rights movement. IGRM was the first one, but but that's no longer in existence. So we were set up originally as the National Gay Federation in 1979. Then in 1990, or was it 91, I always forget, we became the NLGF, the National Lesbian Gay Federation. And then 2 years ago, we changed our name 2013 to become the National LGBT Federation. And reflecting back, and even as an organisation, we say that, that should have been really done a lot earlier than 2013.
Sure.
But it was done in 2013. So you can even see it within our organisation. Over the last generation, there's been an increasing acceptance, and we've been broadening our definition of what our community is. Now, in the 80s, we were really in pretty much the outhouse in Dublin in the 1980s. We were based on Fowne Street in the old Hirschfeld Centre. We were probably even more so because there was a disco, there was a small cinema.
Sure, yeah.
We had the Irish Queer Archive there, and it was the hub of, back then it was gay Dublin. It was the hub of gay Dublin.
Indeed.
And now there was a fire in the Hirschfeld Centre in 87, and it was badly damaged. So the use of the Hirschfeld Centre as a community centre, it no longer could continue as a community centre, but GCN was established. So we're in 1988, so we're the publishers of GCN. So that's our core responsibility. We've a lot of other activities, but our core responsibility is to ensure that GCN is sustainable and continues. And so GCN, which was originally called Gay Community News, is the Ireland's national LGBT publication of record, and now it's the oldest free LGBT community magazine or news magazine in the world. Now there's plenty of there are LGBT magazines in the world or publications that are older, like Gay Times in the UK is older, but it's not for profit or community, and most of them will tend to be either for men or for I don't think there's any publication like GCN that has a remit of for everybody, for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and that all encompassing remit, and it's still free and not for profit after since like 1988. I think it's a real achievement for Ireland. That.
Can I ask you about GCN? And I've
Yes.
got a couple of interests in this. Is that obviously from a media perspective, would you say that GCN follows an independent editorial policy, or does it reflect the thinking behind the National LGBT Federation?
It follows an independent editorial policy in
Sure.
the sense that Brian Finnegan is our editor, and Brian exercises editorial freedom, and editorial freedom is particularly important. So we, as an organisation, set very high level strategic direction for the organisation. So like we're responsible financially for the organisation, and we would set a very high level strategic editorial direction. However, we never get involved in issues of editorial policy at a day-to-day or at a monthly level. So it is we employ an editor, and the editor is the person who has responsibility for making decisions around editorial. And we're
a great job
we're-
he does, let's be
and we're
honest,
the
yeah.
oversight organisation for the magazine or the news magazine as a whole. So, but of course, Brian as editor is very much tuned into what are the needs of the community, and reflects the needs of the community. And there's a number of different forums or ways or mechanisms that GCN can access the feedback or of what a community. And over the next year there is a project. Now, part of the Burning Issues research is we have a small section in GCN where we're asking people as publishers for their feedback in GCN. So we're asking for people what we're doing well in GCN and what could be improved in GCN. So there's a section within Burning Issues, and GCN also as an organisation is going to be over the next year conducting a range of different readership survey and focus groups to see how it can better meet the needs of the community, because GCN's in a very difficult situation in the sense that the media, as you know, the media industry is changing rapidly, and the shift from print media to digital media is a phenomenal shift, really, and even the funding models for media are changing. And that's, I think, in Ireland, the fact that we still have a free not-for-profit community news magazine that is sustainable and is still in printed form is a real achievement for this country.
Do you still see it as always a hard copy, or is there talk of it becoming an online publication the way quite a few others are going?
Like GCN is in a process we're in the middle of a strategic planning process for GCN. So these are all the issues that we're discussing, but we haven't made final decisions on any of these. We know that it's important to have a very strong digital element, and we do currently with the Outmost. However, especially for our community and especially for the LGBT community outside Dublin and in rural areas, the print magazine is still very much valued by a lot of people. And the data that we're getting back from Burning Issues is actually the majority of people are still reading GCN as a print publication. So we have a dual strategy that we're developing a strategic plan, we're listening to the community, we're reflecting. It's also, there are issues of funding and the sustainability of funding. So there's a range of different issues that we need to think about and how we can develop GCN moving forward, and it'll be based on the feedback from Burning Issues and the feedback from GCN's own readership and engagement with the community as well.
Do you see GCN as a publication that is essentially focused at the LGBT community, although it's widely read outside that as well, that perhaps has a political dimension, or do you think it should be relatively politically free? And for argument's sake, would GCN be within its remit, or would it be extending or transgressing its boundaries to, say, take a position on the Eighth Amendment?
GCN has a clear current affairs and news focus, and GCN is not an overtly political magazine. It covers a range of different issues. So there's a strong emphasis on current affairs and news. GCN has historically and always has now been particularly strong on covering arts and culture and entertainment. And the remit of GCN it's actually very, very, very difficult to publish a quality magazine that actually caters for the diversity of our community. It caters for gay men, for lesbians, for bisexuals, for transgender people, and for the ever expanding our community that's expanding people who identify as queer, non-binary, and so it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we hope we're meeting, and we're open to, we're engaging with our stakeholders. GCN's engaging with its stakeholders, and we're having a conversation and a consultation with the community to see how we can position GCN over the next decade, and based on the needs of the community, and also based on whatever funding options are available.
Sure, yeah. No, the reason why I asked that, Ciarán, is that when I was with Tenny a few years ago, there was an article that published in GCN about and I appreciate the need for controversy and to ask difficult questions as to whether the T should be there, and that was very now, to be fair to GCN, they gave Tenny a right of reply. But it was when it was originally posed, the question seemed to be, how can I put it? The response was divisive rather than it was seen as divisive rather than necessarily appreciated for posing, if you like, challenging questions. How do you feel that GCN's role is in that regard? Should it be to lead, or should it be to reflect?
That's a question for the editor, and that's a question for Brian. So we don't set overall editorial direction based on an article a month. Okay. So we have complete confidence in the GCN team and in the decisions that they made. And publications have a range of different. There are times when publications can be at the vanguard in driving debates, and there are times that they can be responding to debates. And in that particular situation, there was a right of reply, and in the end, it opened up a lot of important conversations that were had in the community. Yeah.
Look, all's well that ends well. That's why, as I say, at the end of the day, I think it doesn't hurt to galvanise sides. We're all now on the same page anyway, which I think is a good thing. Burning Issues. This is the main thing we want to talk about. This is Burning Issues 2. Am I correct in that? You've done a previous iteration of the project.
Yeah, so we're currently conducting a national consultation on Burning Issues 2. We did the original Burning Issues in 2009. Quite a number of people at that point had joined the board of the National LGBT Federation, and we're all volunteers on the board of the National LGBT Federation. We don't have paid positions. As an organisation, we have very little funds. We have funds for GCN, but we don't have core funding for our organisation. And quite a few new volunteers had joined. I had joined at that time. Olivia McAvoy, who's our current chair, had joined. Sure. Sean Denyer, who was on the board for a number of years, had joined, and so had Orla Howard, who was on the board of the National LGBT Federation for a very long time and also was Vice Chair of Marriage Equality. And we had felt that really we needed a mandate from the community on how we're approaching the 30-year anniversary of the organisation, and we thought it's important that we got a mandate for community on really the issues that we should be working on, what we should be prioritising as a community, and what the National LGBT Federation should be prioritising. Because up until relatively recently, up until the last 10 years or so, our core focus was publishing GCN, and that was the main thing we did, and we did not our other activity was quite limited. Now, over the last 10 years, it's important that we always ensure that GCN is sustainable, and that's our core activity. But we have been branching out from just publishing GCN. So we conducted the first Burning Issues. Now, the first Burning Issues, looking back, was quite a small piece of research in the sense that Burning Issues 2 is much more ambitious. It was an online survey. We didn't have focus groups across the country, and this was really before social media took off. So we had 1,200 responses, and it was a short survey, and it was really just asking people what are the key burning issues. And back then we thought it may be marriage equality, but actually the first burning issue was that was identified was equality in work. And equality in work, and being able to be free at work and not discriminate at work, and being able to be open about your sexuality at work was the core burning issue back in 2009. Marriage equality was a third issue, and so a lot has happened over the past 6 years. We received funding from the Community Foundation for Ireland to do a follow-up project for Burning Issues. We had originally received the funding in 2013, but I think we made a strategic decision to not to go, because last year was the referendum, to wait until the referendum was over. So now is the perfect time to be doing Burning Issues 2, because we've had such a momentous year, and a lot of people think now that we have marriage equality and now that we have gender recognition, sure, everything's fine. And what we're asking people is, well, actually, what is important to the community? What are the priorities we should be looking at now?
Tell us, Ciarán, how can people participate, and what's the cut-off date?
So the cut-off date is Sunday week, Sunday the 8th of May. So people go on to our website, the www.nxf.ie. So N for Nigel, X for X, F for Freddy, nxf.ie, and just go on to Burning Issues. So we need as many people. We're almost at 2,000 participants. We'd like to get to 2,500. So we have a week and a half to get there. And we'd really appreciate if anybody who's LGBT and living in Ireland, especially people living outside Dublin, but of course if people in Dublin can do it as well, people living outside Dublin, and older people and trans people and women, we particularly would like people, older people, trans people and women and people living outside Dublin to participate in the survey at this point. We've also had public meetings right across the country for the last month, which have been particularly helpful, and it has demonstrated that there's a real need for engagement across outside Dublin and outside the major cities, and that LGBT people living in rural areas, that one of the key focus for us as an organisation and for all the other national organisations, for TENI, for Glen, for Belong To, for the main LGBT organisations in the country, is to reach outside our cities and reach out and build capacity and try to support LGBT people living in rural areas who still feel very isolated and feel that services aren't being provided for them and there's no supports for them.
Ciarán, unfortunately we run out of time. For listeners' benefit, I've taken the survey. It takes about 15 minutes. You can do it online, you can do it on the bus, you can do it on your phone. Unfortunately, as I say, we've run out of time. I want to thank Ciaran Ó'hUltacháin and all our friends at the National LGBT Federation.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I